The wedding bells were ringing, the church was packed with friends and family, and David Matthews, the groom, was standing tall at the altar. It should have been one of the happiest days of his life. But for 8-year-old Ethan, David's son, something was terribly wrong. As he held onto the small pillow carrying the rings, his mind was racing. Ethan knew something that no one else did, and with every passing second, the weight of his secret became harder to bear. The bride, Emily, a beautiful woman with golden hair and sparkling blue eyes, glided down the aisle, radiating happiness. Everyone was mesmerized by her beauty, including David, who looked at her with pure adoration. But Ethan wasn't. His gaze was fixed not on the glowing bride, but on his father, the man who, in just moments, would be bound to someone Ethan knew was hiding a dark and dangerous secret. Ethan's stomach churned. How could he stand by and let his father marry a woman who had been deceiving them both? His hands clenched tighter around the ring pillow, his heart pounding as the moments ticked by. How could he, a young boy, have the power to stop something so big and important? And yet deep inside, he knew he had to act. He had to protect his father, no matter how hard it was. The wedding was perfect in every way on the surface, the sunlight streaming through the chapel windows, the floral arrangements carefully placed, the guests eagerly anticipating the vows. Yet amidst the scene of beauty and love, Ethan was alone in his struggle. He had uncovered something terrible, and now, the weight of that truth pressed on him like a boulder. That's when the officiant spoke the words that would change everything. If anyone here can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together in matrimony, speak now, or forever hold your peace. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Ethan knew this was his last chance. If he stayed silent, his father would be bound to Emily forever, and something terrible might happen. He swallowed hard, his small voice trembling as he blurted out, "Wait!" A collective gasp echoed through the church. All eyes turned toward Ethan, who stood trembling, his face pale but determined. His father, David, looked confused. Emily's smile faltered, and a flicker of something dark crossed her face. "What are you doing, buddy?" David asked gently, not understanding the gravity of what was about to unfold. But Ethan knew he couldn't back down now. He had to tell the truth, no matter how hard it was, no matter who would believe him. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the weight of the moment suffocating him. But still, he pressed on. And so he did. "Dad, you can't marry her," Ethan said, his voice shaking. "She's been lying to you about everything." The room fell silent. The joyful atmosphere vanished in an instant, replaced by a tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Ethan took a deep breath. He had to be brave. He had to tell the truth, even if it meant ruining what was supposed to be the happiest day of his father's life. But how would David react? How would the guests respond to such a shocking revelation from a boy so young? This was the moment that would change everything. Ethan was about to reveal a secret that no one saw coming, and what happens next would leave everyone stunned. Why did Ethan stop the wedding? What was the truth about Emily? And why did it lead to such dramatic consequences? Stay tuned to find out, and if this story of bravery and honesty resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. The day had finally arrived. The small chapel was bathed in sunlight, casting a golden glow through the stained glass windows. The pews were filled with friends, family, and well-wishers, all waiting for the ceremony to begin. David Matthews stood at the altar, his crisp black tuxedo a stark contrast to the warm hues of the room. He looked every bit the happy groom, his face lit up with a smile that stretched ear to ear. He had waited for this moment, for a chance at happiness again after years of loss. But not everyone shared in his excitement. In the front row, Ethan sat quietly, fidgeting with the small pillow in his lap that held the wedding rings. His dark curls were neatly combed, and his miniature suit matched his father's perfectly. To an outsider, he looked like a typical nervous ring bearer, overwhelmed by the big event. But inside, Ethan was wrestling with something far more intense. His brown eyes darted between the church entrance and his father, who stood eagerly awaiting his bride, Emily. While everyone else saw a day of joy, Ethan felt nothing but dread. He knew the truth, a truth that no one else could see. For months he had kept a secret, one that weighed heavier on him with each passing moment. Ethan could feel the knot of fear tightening in his stomach, the same fear that had kept him silent for so long. But now, sitting in the front row of the chapel, he knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. The first notes of the wedding march filled the air. The congregation rose to their feet, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the bride. Ethan didn't stand. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched the doors swing open to reveal Emily, dressed in a stunning white gown. Her golden hair shimmered in the light, cascading in waves down her back. Her smile was radiant, and as she began her walk down the aisle, all eyes were on her. All eyes except Ethan's. Instead of focusing on the bride, Ethan watched his father. David's face lit up with pure joy as Emily approached, his love for her written all over his expression. It was the happiest Ethan had seen his father since his mother passed away, and that's what made this so much harder. Ethan's father had been through so much pain, and now, when he was finally finding happiness again, Ethan was about to destroy it. His grip on the ring pillow tightened, his knuckles turning white. The memory of the past few months flashed before his eyes, a mental slideshow of every moment that had led up to this day. He thought about the first time his father had introduced him to Emily, a bright autumn afternoon that seemed so full of promise. David had been so excited, his face beaming as they drove home, eager to introduce his son to the woman who had brought light back into his life. But for Ethan, that light had never truly shone. At first, everything seemed fine. Emily was kind to him, at least when his father was around. But the longer they spent together, the more Ethan noticed the cracks in her perfect facade. She wasn't the woman his father thought she was. Ethan's mind flashed back to one specific night, a few months before the wedding. His father had been working late, leaving Ethan alone with Emily. It had been a quiet evening at first, too quiet. Ethan had tried to make small talk, but Emily's responses were short and cold. And then, when he accidentally spilled his juice on the coffee table, everything changed. She had grabbed his arm so hard it hurt, her face twisted with anger as she hissed at him to clean it up. She had warned him that if he told his father, he'd regret it. From that moment on, Ethan had been afraid of Emily. She was two-faced, sweet and loving in front of David, but cruel and distant when they were alone. Ethan had tried to tell his father once, to warn him about Emily, but his father didn't believe him. David had brushed it off, saying that Ethan was just adjusting to having someone new in their lives. So, Ethan stopped trying. He swallowed his fears, bottled up the hurt, and told himself that maybe it was all in his head. But then came the night when Ethan overheard Emily on the phone. He had woken up in the middle of the night, thirsty, and as he tiptoed down the hall toward the kitchen, he heard her voice, sharp and angry, not the soft and loving tone she used when his father was around. Ethan had stopped in his tracks, listening through the crack in the door as Emily talked to someone named Mark. She mentioned an insurance policy and spoke of plans for after the wedding, plans that made Ethan's blood run cold. That was the moment Ethan knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. Emily wasn't just mean, she was dangerous. She had plans that would put his father's life at risk, and Ethan had to stop her. But how? How could an 8-year-old boy stand up in front of all these people and tell them that the bride was a liar, a fraud, and maybe worse? The wedding march continued to play as Emily reached the altar. She smiled at David, who took her hand, his eyes full of love. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. His father deserved happiness, but not like this. Not with her. As the ceremony began, the officiant's words washed over Ethan in a blur. He couldn't focus. All he could think about was the phone call, the secrets, and the danger that loomed if he didn't speak up. He glanced at his father one last time and then at Emily, who stood there, looking every bit the perfect bride. And then the officiant spoke the fateful words. If anyone can show just cause why this couple should not be lawfully joined together in matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." Ethan's heart raced. His moment had come. He took a deep breath, his hands shaking, and stood up. Ethan sat in the front row of the chapel, his heart pounding as the wedding continued around him. His mind, however, wasn't in the present. It drifted back to the moments that had led him to this point, sitting there with a truth so dangerous it might tear his family apart. The first time Ethan met Emily was a cool autumn day, months ago. He had just finished school and his father had come to pick him up with a grin that stretched from ear to ear. David was practically bouncing with excitement as they drove home. "I've got someone really special I want you to meet," he had said, glancing at Ethan with eager eyes. Ethan remembered feeling a knot of uncertainty in his stomach. Since his mother passed away, it had just been him and his dad, and now someone new was coming into their lives. When they arrived at the house, Emily was waiting for them on the porch. The late afternoon sun highlighted her golden hair, and she smiled warmly as they approached. "Ethan, this is Emily," his father had said, his voice full of pride. "She's very important to me, and I hope she'll become important to you too." Emily had knelt down to his level, her blue eyes twinkling. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Ethan. Your dad talks about you all the time." At first, everything seemed fine. Emily was kind, always smiling, and asking about Ethan's day. She joined them for dinners, laughed at Ethan's jokes, and even brought him small gifts every now and then. His father seemed happier than he had been in years. Ethan tried to feel the same, but there was something about Emily that didn't sit right with him. She seemed too perfect, like she was always putting on a show. And soon enough, the cracks in her facade began to show. It started with little things. When his father wasn't around, Emily would sometimes ignore him or give him short, dismissive answers when he tried to talk to her. At first, Ethan thought maybe she was just busy or distracted, but then came the day when her mask truly slipped. One evening, his father had to work late, and Emily was in charge of watching him. They sat at the dinner table, and Ethan, who had always been curious about space, tried to share something he had learned in school. "Miss Emily, did you know that Jupiter has more than 79 moons? Isn't that amazing?" Emily didn't even look up from her phone. "That's nice," she said, her voice flat. "Eat your dinner quietly, please." Ethan had shrunk back in his seat, pushing his food around on his plate. It was the first time she had spoken to him in that cold, dismissive tone. The warmth that had been in her eyes earlier was gone, replaced by something hard and unkind. But things got worse. One night, a few weeks later, Ethan accidentally knocked over his glass of juice while watching TV. The juice spilled across the coffee table and onto the carpet. Before he could even apologize, Emily was there, her face twisted with anger. She grabbed him by the arm, her nails digging into his skin. "Look what you've done, you clumsy little boy," she hissed. "Clean it up. And if you tell your father about this, you'll be very sorry." Ethan had cleaned up the spill as quickly as he could, his hands shaking. He didn't tell his father what had happened. He didn't know why, but the fear that gripped him in that moment was enough to keep him silent. Emily was a different person when his father wasn't around, and he couldn't understand how no one else saw it. The weeks passed, and Emily's behavior didn't improve. When his father was home, she was all smiles and kindness. But as soon as David left the room, her demeanor shifted. She made subtle, cutting remarks, comments that chipped away at Ethan's confidence. "You're such a handful," she'd sigh whenever he made a mistake. "I don't know how your father deals with you." Ethan became more withdrawn, spending more time in his room where he didn't have to be around her. He wanted to tell his dad, to explain what was happening, but every time he thought about it, Emily's threats echoed in his head. She had his father wrapped around her finger. What if his dad didn't believe him? What if he thought Ethan was just making things up because he didn't like the idea of someone new in their lives? But then everything changed one night, about a month before the wedding. It was late, nearly midnight, and Ethan had woken up thirsty. He tiptoed down the hallway to the kitchen, trying not to make too much noise. As he reached the living room, he heard voices. Emily's voice, sharp and low, as if she didn't want to be overheard. He crept closer, crouching down by the corner of the hallway. Emily was pacing back and forth, talking on the phone. "Mark, you need to listen to me," she whispered harshly. "We can't rush this. Everything has to be perfect." Ethan froze, his heart racing. He knew he shouldn't be listening, but something in Emily's voice scared him. He peeked around the corner, just enough to see her. She was pacing the living room, her expression angry and tense. "The wedding is in 2 weeks," she continued, her voice dripping with frustration. "Once that's done, we move on to phase 2. Yes, the insurance policy. David doesn't suspect a thing." Ethan's blood ran cold. Insurance policy? What was she talking about? "No," Emily snapped, her voice rising. "Everything's under control. Just stick to the plan. Once we get the money, we'll be set for life. No more close calls." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The money, the insurance policy, what was Emily planning? "That brat is the wild card," Emily growled, her tone darkening. "He's too observant for his own good, but don't worry, I can handle him. David's wrapped around my finger. He'd never believe a word against his precious fiancée." Tears stung Ethan's eyes. He had always known Emily didn't like him, but hearing her talk about him like this, it hurt more than he could have imagined. "Just be ready," Emily said, her voice final. 2 weeks after the wedding, we strike. David won't know what hit him." With that, she ended the call. Ethan scrambled back down the hallway, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure Emily could hear it. He dove back into bed, pulling the covers over his head as if they could protect him from what he had just overheard. Emily was planning something terrible, and it involved his dad. That night, sleep was impossible. Ethan tossed and turned, replaying the conversation over and over in his head. Insurance policy, phase 2, strike after the wedding. What did it all mean? He didn't understand the details, but he knew one thing for certain. His father was in danger. Emily was not who she pretended to be, and if Ethan didn't do something, his father might get hurt. The next morning, Ethan felt like a zombie. He stumbled to the breakfast table, bleary-eyed and exhausted. His father, as usual, greeted him with a cheerful, "Good morning, champ," while Emily smiled sweetly from across the table. But Ethan couldn't meet her eyes. The memory of her words from the night before sent a shiver down his spine. Emily wasn't just mean, she was dangerous. Days passed, and Ethan found himself growing more and more anxious. Every time Emily smiled at his father or touched his arm affectionately, it made Ethan's stomach churn. He knew what she was planning, but he didn't know how to stop it. He tried to act normal, to play along with the happy family facade, but inside, he was falling apart. He was just a kid. How was he supposed to stop an adult from carrying out something so horrible? Then one afternoon, Ethan got his chance. His father had gone out to run errands, and Emily had left the house saying she was meeting some friends. The house was quiet, and for the first time in days, Ethan felt like he could breathe. That's when he noticed Emily's laptop sitting on the coffee table. Ethan knew he shouldn't. He knew it was wrong to snoop. But something inside him, maybe it was the memory of that phone call, pushed him forward. His hand shook as he opened the laptop. It was password protected. Of course it was. Ethan tried a few guesses. Her birthday, the wedding date. Nothing worked. He was about to give up when he noticed something sticking out from under the laptop, a small, yellow, sticky note. His heart raced as he pulled it out. There, written in Emily's neat handwriting, was a series of letters and numbers. Could it be? With trembling fingers, Ethan typed the code into the password field. The screen blinked, and the laptop unlocked. Ethan's eyes widened as he scrolled through her files. There were dozens of documents, most of them with boring names like wedding planning and guest list. But then he saw it, one file labeled Insurance Policy. He clicked on it and a PDF opened. It was full of legal terms that Ethan didn't understand, but a few things stood out. Accidental death, double indemnity, and payout of $5 million. Ethan's stomach twisted. $5 million? Was that what his dad's life was worth to Emily? Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The weight of the secret he carried felt heavier than ever as the ceremony unfolded. He stood at the front of the church, barely able to focus as the officiant's voice echoed through the chapel. His father was beaming, Emily's hand in his as the two prepared to exchange vows. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. Guests smiled, whispering excitedly among themselves, oblivious to the storm brewing in the mind of the 8-year-old boy holding the rings. Ethan's eyes flicked between Emily and his father, knowing he had to do something. He had uncovered too much: Emily's plans, the insurance policy, and the sinister phone call with Mark. But how could he stop this? He was just a kid. Would anyone even believe him? The officiant continued. If anyone here can show just cause why this couple should not be lawfully joined together in matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The words echoed like a thunderclap in Ethan's mind. This was it, his last chance to stop the wedding, to stop Emily before it was too late. He swallowed hard, his palms sweating as he looked at his father. David's face was filled with pure joy and love, completely unaware of the danger he was in. Ethan's legs felt like they were made of lead, his voice trapped in his throat. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like never before. His father trusted Emily completely. If he spoke up, if he told the truth, would his father even believe him? What if he ruined everything? But if he stayed silent, he knew the consequences could be far worse. The congregation sat in silence, waiting for the ceremony to continue, but Ethan knew he couldn't wait any longer. His father's life was at stake. Finally, the words burst out of him, "Wait, stop the wedding." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Heads turned, shocked faces stared at Ethan, who stood trembling, clutching the ring pillow tightly in his hands. His voice was small, but it carried through the church like a bombshell. David's joyful expression faltered, confusion clouding his eyes. "Ethan," he said softly, stepping toward his son. "What's wrong, buddy?" Emily's face stiffened, her smile frozen as her gaze flickered between Ethan and David. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone waited to hear what Ethan would say next. "Dad," Ethan's voice quivered, but he forced himself to continue. "You can't marry her. She's not who you think she is." The silence in the church was deafening. David knelt down in front of Ethan, his eyes filled with concern. "What do you mean, Ethan? What's going on?" Ethan's throat tightened. This was the hardest thing he had ever done. But he couldn't back down now. He had to protect his father. "Emily's been lying to you," he said, his voice gaining strength with each word. "She's planning something bad." A murmur ran through the crowd as guests exchanged bewildered looks. Emily's expression darkened, but she quickly masked it with a soft, patronizing smile. "Oh, sweetie," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I know this has been a big change for you. It's hard to have a new mom in your life, but this isn't the way to handle your feelings." "No," Ethan shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "That's not it. I heard you talking on the phone with someone named Mark. You were talking about an insurance policy and hurting my dad after the wedding." Another collective gasp filled the room. David's face went pale, his eyes wide with shock. He turned to Emily, disbelief written all over his face. "What is he talking about, Emily?" Emily's smile wavered, her eyes narrowing slightly as she glanced around the room, gauging the crowd's reaction. "David," she began, her voice calm but strained. "He's just a child. He's confused. This is a difficult time for him and he's—" "No, I'm not," Ethan interrupted, his voice strong now. "I saw the insurance policy on your computer. I saw the files with Mark's name. I know you're planning something bad." The room erupted into a cacophony of whispers, guests murmuring among themselves as the tension in the church escalated. David stared at Emily, his mind racing. He looked back at his son, then at the woman he was about to marry. "Emily, is any of this true?" Emily's composure cracked for just a moment, long enough for David to see the panic flash in her eyes. She quickly recovered, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "David, don't be ridiculous. Are you seriously going to believe this wild story from an 8-year-old? He's upset and he's making things up. He doesn't understand." Ethan shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm not making it up, Dad. I wouldn't lie to you." David stood frozen, torn between his son's desperate pleas and the woman he thought he loved. The doubt was clear in his eyes as he looked at Emily, searching for answers. "I think we should talk about this privately," Emily said, her voice tight with barely contained anger. She turned to the officiant, trying to regain control of the situation. "I'm sorry for this interruption. We'll sort it out, but let's get on with the ceremony." But David didn't move. He couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was horribly wrong. The way Emily was reacting, it didn't feel right. Slowly, he turned back to Ethan. "What did you see, son? Tell me everything." Ethan took a deep breath, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I heard her talking on the phone with a man named Mark. She said they were going to hurt you after the wedding to get money from the insurance. I saw it on her computer. She's been lying to you." David's face drained of color. He looked at Emily, his heart pounding. "Emily, is this true?" Emily's mask slipped entirely. Her expression hardened, her eyes cold and calculating as she realized the facade was falling apart. "David," she said slowly, her voice low and dangerous, "we don't need to do this here. Let's leave." But David didn't budge. He stared at her, his world crumbling as the truth began to set in. "Is it true?" he asked again, his voice breaking. Emily's jaw clenched. She took a step back, her eyes darting around the church. The guests were silent, watching the confrontation unfold like a scene from a movie. For a moment she looked like she might say something, but then, in an instant, she turned on her heel and bolted toward the church doors. "Stop her!" someone shouted. Chaos erupted as people scrambled to follow Emily, but she was quick. She pushed past the guests, her white dress trailing behind her as she disappeared out of the chapel. David stood frozen, his mind racing. The woman he had planned to spend his life with had just revealed her true self, and it was a nightmare. David dropped to his knees in front of Ethan, pulling his son into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry, buddy," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I should have listened to you. I should have seen it." Tears streamed down Ethan's face as he clung to his father. "I just didn't want her to hurt you, Dad." David held him close, the weight of the betrayal sinking in. "You saved me, Ethan. You saved both of us." The church doors slammed behind Emily as she fled, leaving the entire congregation in stunned silence. The weight of what had just unfolded pressed down on everyone like a lead blanket. Guests, still whispering furiously, exchanged glances filled with shock and disbelief. Some stood frozen, unsure of what to do, while others moved to the exits, trying to make sense of the chaos that had just erupted in what was supposed to be a joyous occasion. David remained kneeling on the ground, holding Ethan tightly. His world had collapsed in a matter of minutes, and he could barely process it. The woman he had planned to spend the rest of his life with had been hiding something dark, and his own son, his brave, honest son, had seen the truth when he hadn't. Slowly, the whispers turned into murmurs of concern. "Is it true?" someone asked quietly, breaking the silence. "Did she really plan to hurt him?" Another guest nodded solemnly. "The boy heard everything. Why would he lie?" A few guests moved toward the front of the church, wanting to offer comfort, but unsure how to approach the fragile scene. David's best man, Jack, stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on David's shoulder. "Dave," Jack said softly, "you all right, man? Is there anything I can do?" David lifted his head, his face pale and his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and disbelief. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I didn't see it, Jack. I didn't see any of it." "You couldn't have known," Jack said gently. "None of us did." but David shook his head. Ethan tried to tell me, he warned me, and I didn't listen. I let her get too close. I let her fool me. Ethan pulled away slightly, looking up at his father. "Dad, it's not your fault," he said, his voice soft but firm. "She tricked everyone. You couldn't have known." David squeezed his son's shoulder, the guilt eating away at him. "I should have listened to you," he whispered. "You've always been so good, Ethan. So brave. I should have believed you." Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes again, but this time they weren't just from fear or sadness. They were from relief. For so long, he had carried the weight of this secret, terrified that no one would believe him. But now, standing here in his father's arms, he knew he had done the right thing. He had saved his dad. "I just didn't want her to hurt you," Ethan whispered. David hugged him tighter, his heart aching. "I'm so proud of you, Ethan. You saved me, buddy. You saved us both." As the father and son shared a quiet moment, the sound of sirens pierced the air outside. The police had been called, and within moments 2 officers entered the church, their presence commanding immediate attention. They quickly made their way toward David, who stood up, still holding Ethan's hand tightly. "Mr. Matthews?" one of the officers asked, his tone serious. "We were called about an incident here. Is everything all right?" David took a deep breath, nodding. "Yes, no, I mean my fiancée, Emily. She's not who she said she was. My son, he overheard her planning something bad. She was going to hurt me for the insurance money. She just ran out of the church." The officer nodded, his expression grave. "We'll need to take your statement, sir. Do you have any information that can help us track her down?" "She's dangerous," Ethan added, his voice shaking. "She's been talking to a man named Mark. I heard them talking about hurting my dad after the wedding." The second officer immediately radioed for backup, describing Emily's appearance and instructing units to search the surrounding area. "Thank you for telling us, son," the first officer said, his voice kind as he crouched down to Ethan's level. "You did the right thing by speaking up. We'll make sure she doesn't hurt anyone." David looked down at Ethan, his heart swelling with pride. He couldn't believe the strength his son had shown in the face of such danger. "You're so brave, Ethan," he said quietly, ruffling his son's hair. As the officers continued their investigation, David's thoughts raced. He couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, the hurt of knowing that the woman he had trusted with his heart had been planning something so terrible. But amidst all the confusion and pain, one thing was clear: Ethan had saved him. As the days stretched into weeks, the dust from the shattered wedding slowly began to settle. Life for David and Ethan became a quiet rhythm, marked by small moments of healing and the constant reminder that they had come so close to a terrible fate. Yet even in the silence, both father and son felt the scars left behind by Emily's betrayal. David had taken time off from work to focus on Ethan and himself. The shock of the wedding day, the lies, the deceit, it all weighed heavily on him. But his son was his anchor. Each morning, David would find Ethan sitting at the kitchen table with his cereal, his eyes distant, as if still trying to process everything. David understood that feeling all too well. He felt it every time he looked at the empty space at the table where Emily used to sit, every time he passed her untouched wedding dress still hanging in his closet. One morning, as Ethan sat eating his breakfast, David joined him, a cup of coffee in hand. The air between them was heavy, but there was also an unspoken bond, a shared understanding that they would get through this together. "Hey, buddy," David said softly, watching Ethan push his cereal around his bowl. Ethan glanced up, offering a weak smile. "Morning, Dad." David studied his son for a moment, then sighed. "I know things have been hard lately," he began. "I know you're probably still thinking about what happened." Ethan looked down, his small hands gripping the edge of the table. "Yeah," he admitted. "I keep thinking about how close it was, how close she came to hurting you." David reached across the table, placing a hand over Ethan's. "But she didn't, because of you. You saved me, Ethan. You saw the truth when I couldn't." Ethan swallowed hard, blinking back the tears that threatened to spill over. "I was so scared, Dad. I didn't know if you would believe me." David's heart ached as he squeezed Ethan's hand. "I should have listened to you sooner," he said, his voice filled with regret. "But I promise from now on I'll always listen, no matter what." Ethan nodded, a small sense of relief washing over him. The trust between them had been tested, but now it was stronger than ever. They had survived the storm and they were still standing, together. The weeks continued to pass, and though the memories of Emily's betrayal still lingered, life for David and Ethan slowly began to rebuild. The police investigation into Emily and Mark continued, but updates were few and far between. It seemed that Emily had vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of her lies. Ethan found himself struggling at times. Even though school provided a distraction, there were moments when the weight of everything he had uncovered hit him all over again. One day after school, as he sat in his room staring at a book he couldn't focus on, the door creaked open, and David poked his head in. "Hey, champ, you okay?" David asked, concern evident in his voice. Ethan shrugged, not meeting his father's eyes. "Yeah, I guess. Just tired." David stepped inside and sat down on the edge of Ethan's bed. He could tell his son was still carrying the weight of what had happened. It wasn't something that could be shaken off easily. He knew that from experience. "Look, I know this isn't easy," David said gently. "What happened? It was a lot for anyone to go through, let alone you." Ethan looked up at his dad, his voice small. "Do you think they'll ever find her?" David hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I don't know," he admitted. "The police are doing everything they can, but Emily's smart. She knows how to disappear. But I do know this. She can't hurt us anymore." Ethan nodded, though the uncertainty still gnawed at him. What if she comes back? What if she tries to hurt you again?" David wrapped an arm around his son, pulling him close. "She won't. And if she ever did, we'd be ready. We're stronger than we were before, Ethan. We're not going to let her control our lives." Ethan leaned into his father's side, comforted by his words. It was true. They were stronger. Together, they had faced down a threat that could have destroyed them, and they had come out on the other side. As the months passed, the shadows of Emily's betrayal began to fade. The home that had once felt haunted by her presence slowly became a sanctuary again, a place of safety and warmth for both David and Ethan. They spent more time together, bonding over small things, weekend movie nights, impromptu trips to the park, and even a long overdue visit to their favorite fishing spot. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset over the horizon, David glanced at Ethan, a thoughtful look on his face. "You know, buddy," David began, his voice soft, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about how lucky I am." Ethan turned to him, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Lucky?" David nodded. "Yeah, lucky to have you in my life. Lucky that we're both still here, that we still have each other." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "I guess we're both lucky." David grinned, ruffling his son's hair. "You're right. We are." The camping trip they had taken became a cherished memory, a symbol of the fresh start they both needed. It wasn't just a getaway. It was a chance to reconnect, to remember what was most important in their lives, each other. And as time continued to pass, David and Ethan found peace in the little things. They didn't need grand gestures or elaborate plans to feel whole again. All they needed was each other, the unbreakable bond between father and son. Every day, David would look at Ethan and feel a surge of gratitude. Gratitude for the courage Ethan had shown, for the strength he had found in the face of fear, and for the love that had kept them both grounded through the worst of it all. "Whatever comes next," David said one evening as they sat together in the living room, the glow of the fireplace casting soft shadows on the walls. "We'll face it together. You and me, always." Ethan smiled, resting his head against his father's shoulder. Always. As the sun set on the journey of Ethan and his father, their bond had grown stronger than ever. What began as a nightmare of deception and betrayal had transformed into a story of resilience, love, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it seems impossible. Ethan's bravery had not only saved his father's life, but had also uncovered the dark truth behind someone they both trusted. In the end, their love for each other triumphed over the lies, and they emerged from the storm closer and stronger. This story isn't just about stopping a wedding, it's about the incredible power of speaking up, even when it feels like the hardest thing to do. Ethan's choice to act despite his fears reminds us all that the truth can shine through even in the darkest of times. His courage didn't just save his father, it changed both of their lives forever. And it's a powerful reminder to all of us that standing up for what's right is always worth it. Ethan's journey is a testament to the strength we all have inside, no matter how young or small we may feel. His bravery shows that even the quietest voice can make the biggest difference. And sometimes the hardest battles aren't the ones we fight with our fists, but the ones we face with our hearts. As we close this chapter, take a moment to reflect on your own life. Are there moments when you wished you had spoken up? Are there people in your life who need to hear the truth, even if it's difficult? Ethan's story shows that being honest, even when it's scary, can be the most important choice you ever make. We'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you think you would have handled the situation if you were in Ethan's shoes? Would you have had the courage to speak up, or would fear have kept you silent? Let us know in the comments below. We can't wait to read your insights. And before you go, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. By subscribing, you'll never miss another heartwarming and inspiring story like this one. Your support means everything to us, and it helps us continue bringing you the stories that matter. So if this story touched your heart, give it a like, share it with friends, and stay tuned for more incredible tales to come. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Remember, no matter how tough things get, the truth always finds its way to the surface. Stay brave, stay honest, and we'll see you in the next story.